welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. On today's episode, we'll conclude our discussion of the year 1976 and the Beach Boys' 1976 studio release, 15 Big Ones. Of course, the title 15 Big Ones not only refers to the number of tracks on this album, it also refers to 15 years in show business that the Beach Boys were celebrating at the time, having begun their professional career in 1961. Also on the album cover, which is by Kitty Hawk Graphics, Dean Torrance's company, you'll notice the design sort of echoes the Olympic rings, 1976 being the year of the Summer Olympics in Montreal. I'm sure today there would be a huge trademark suit over this. There may have been some problem with it at the time. I never heard that there was. I'm sure today they would not have gotten away with this as easily as they seem to have gotten away with it in 1976. So, as we discussed last time, the album came out, was highly promoted by Warner Reprise, and became very successful. It went to number 8 on the charts. The first track on the album is a version of Chuck Berry's Rock and Roll Music. Of course, it's a very different arrangement from the Chuck Berry original, with much more of an emphasis on the sort of doo-wop style vocals that have been added. Now, Carl Wilson appeared on the National Album Countdown in the spring of 1976 and played a version of Rock and Roll Music with an extra verse and a different mix that had the instruments more to the fore and the vocals a little bit lower down. It was a more rocking mix, and a lot of people who've heard it consider it superior to what was released as the single. But the single did hit number 5, so pretty good work here from the Beach Boys, at least chart-wise on that. It's enjoyable, it became a staple in concert. I believe they still play it in concert. Mike Love's band certainly does when they appear as the Beach Boys. The second song on the album was also the second single, It's Okay. It was the only song that was retrieved for this album from the November 1974 sessions and completed for this album in 1976. It's also the last Beach Boy track release that has Ricky Fataar playing drums. He does play percussion on the final track on this album. This is the last track where Ricky is credited as a drummer, along with Dennis. It was a good single. It's a great song, certainly a worthy Beach Boys song. Gets the album off to a great start. The single went to number 29, so not bad. Interestingly, Roy Wood and Wizard are credited with the saxophones on It's Okay. The next track is another Brian and Mike co-write called Had to Phone Ya, and also one of the better tracks on the album. I would say It's Okay and Had to Phone Ya are probably the two best things on this album. So if you're listening to this album for the first time, 3 tracks in, you've got a pretty solid Beach Boy album here. Rock and Roll Music, It's Okay, and Had to Phone Ya. By the way, it's not too difficult for me to have researched the players on this, since it does provide very nice detailed liner notes on the back cover, something that I really enjoy. Once we get to the 4th track, we get the first of the cover versions. It's Brian doing Chapel of Love. A couple tracks later, we get Brian doing Talk to Me. Now, both of these are basically the core of Brian, Carl, and Dennis performing with some overdubs. This is the kind of thing that Brian wanted to do. They had him do it to warm up, hoping that he would inspire him to go on and write some songs. For a long time, I felt that 15 Big Ones was a complete departure from what had come before it, and had really nothing stylistically to do with the Holland album that had preceded it or any of the things that had come before. But listening to an interview with Brian Wilson talking about his original vision for the Fairy Tale disc that came with the Holland album, that he had originally intended to have the fairy tale and the fairy tale music intercut with covers of oldies. And you can kind of see how that would have worked with Talk to Me, and a little bit less so with Chapel of Love. One of the things with Talk to Me that I don't understand is right in the middle of the track, they have a snippet from a cover version that's otherwise unreleased that they did of Freddie Cannon's Tallahassee Lassie. And it's just like an interruption in the middle of the thing. It's really annoying. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea to throw that in there. Somebody's idea of, I don't know, sprucing it up or making it more interesting. I have no idea. Sandwiched in between those two is a very pleasant Mike Love track called Everyone's in Love with You. Among the musicians on this track is Mike Love's sister, Maureen Love West, on harp, and jazz musician Charles Lloyd, a friend of Mike's and fellow TM enthusiast, on flute. It's a song that I think suffers simply because of the Mike Love pedigree. It's a nice song. It's one of Mike Love's best works. People tend to dismiss it, I think, just because it's Mike Love. If Brian Wilson was co-credited on it, I think it would be thought of with much higher esteem. I think Mike Love's writing is unfairly maligned on that song. It's really not bad. Rounding out side one are the last two new original songs on the album. The first one is that same song, a Brian and Mike co-write, which is a sort of a gospel number. The arrangement has a sort of almost like a cuckoo sound in it that I've always thought was sort of out of place. There's a version in the It's Okay special done with the Beach Boys and the Double Rock Baptist Church Choir that is really quite superior and really a fun thing to watch on the It's Okay special, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The final track on side one is the TM song, which oddly enough is credited to Brian Wilson alone as the composer, strangely because Mike Love is certainly the big TM enthusiast of the group. It's funny that he is not credited on that particular track. And it begins with an argument, a staged argument, kind of reminiscent of the Cassius Love versus Sonny Wilson shtick on Shutdown Volume 2, and very similar to a staged argument that he had with Hal Blaine that was recorded as a possible introduction to Vegetables on the Smile album. He apparently had long-running interest in recording a faked argument and putting it on an album, and he finally did it here on the TM song. TM song also is Al Jardine's first solo lead vocal on 15 Big Ones. Beginning with side two, you've got Palisades Park, another cover version. This one's sung by Carl Wilson. It's more of a production than the two on side one, Talk to Me and Chapel of Love. It's it's got some of the Wrecking Crew on it. It's much bigger production. It's decent. It certainly reminds you of County Fair from Surfin' Safari, or very much Amusement Parks USA from Summer Days and Summer Nights. So hearkening back to earlier and more innocent times for the Beach Boys. Following this, we get another Al Jardine song, Susie Cincinnati. But this is not a new recording. This is from 1970. It was released as the B-side of Add Some Music to Your Day. Thematically, it fits here. It's a mild remix. The main difference between the earlier version and this version being that there are some car effects that have been moved to the middle of the song that were previously at the beginning of the song. But it's really just a B-side from 1970 that's been included to round out the album here. That is followed by Mike Love's version of Blueberry Hill, maybe one of the low points of the album. It's very sluggish. It does have a nice part early on with a string bass high in the mix, which is kind of cool. Could really be a Mike Love solo track just about. I mean, it's not terrible, but not of particular interest, and maybe the low point of the album. That is followed by another Brian Wilson original, but this original back home dates back all the way to 1963. They had attempted to record it in 63. At the time, it was credited to Brian and his former roommate Bob Norberg. They tried it again in 1970 for the Sunflower album. It was one of the tracks. It was tried and rejected for that. Back Home finally appears here on 15 Big Ones. And it's a track I really like. It's a fun track to sing along to. It's goofy. It's very catchy. I really like it. To me, it's maybe the third or fourth best thing on the entire album, just because it's a lot of fun. That is followed by two more covers to close out the album, In the Still of the Night, which has some beautiful backing vocals by the group and is Dennis's turn to sing lead. Very, very nice song. And the final track, a cover version of the Righteous Brothers, Just Once in My Life. And it's got Carl and Brian on lead, and it's got use of the Moog synthesizer played by Brian, which will really come to the fore in 1977 on the Beach Boys' Love You. And it's really kind of interesting, in retrospect, Just Once in My Life, the arrangement there is so similar to what comes on next year's album that it's almost like a preview of what's coming. Now, I know it could not have been intended that way, but if you listen to it, that track alone comfortably could have fit on Beach Boys' Love You in 1977. So, though Beach Boys' 15 Big Ones was very successful for a Beach Boys album, I have to say that I would rate it as probably the worst Beach Boy album up to this point. Surfin' Safari, their first album, had been very amateurish, but it's interesting. They certainly were giving it their all. You kind of have to judge that one based on where they were in their career at the time. Smiley Smile is certainly an acquired taste. It's sometimes annoying. Maybe it's not as musical, but at least it's original and different, and so I give it higher marks for that. 15 Big Ones, a lot of cover versions, a lot of things that aren't particularly interesting. There are some high points there. There's some really worthy songs included in it, but really at the time, it was something of a disappointment. So 15 Big Ones is released July 5th, 1976, and as we've discussed, is heavily, heavily promoted by Warner Reprise. And one of the big promotions is a primetime television special sponsored by Dr. Pepper and produced by Lorne Michaels, who has just come off his first season of producing the new show Saturday Night Live. The special is really cool. It's got concert footage from several concerts. If you don't know why Mike Love is essential to the Beach Boys, you should watch it just for that. Mike is an amazing front man throughout. Brian is on stage for the concerts. Sometimes he's participating, sometimes he seems nervous and zoned out, but the concert footage is great. And intercut with it, keeping it interesting, are these little vignettes. You get interviews with the band members. You get a very interesting thing of the Wilson brothers talking about Murray, and then Brian on the piano with Carl and Dennis singing, backing, performing Bugged at My Old Man from the Summer Days and Summer Nights album. And that's interesting because Brian is so ill at ease at the beginning, and about halfway through he coughs and then clears his throat, and when he looks at Carl and realizes that they're not going to cut, they're just going to continue, suddenly it's like the pressure is off and you see him smiling and enjoying himself because he's screwed up and it wasn't the end of the world. They just kept going. And I know there were several takes. It's interesting that they left that one in because there's such relaxation once he's messed up and it hasn't been a big deal. Interesting too is when they are performing that same song with the Double Rock Baptist Church Choir. You can see Brian getting more and more confident in the performance, and at the end he's really rocking and really enjoying himself, and it's really cool to see. There are a lot of other documentaries that use clips from that. If you see the full version in the It's Okay special, it's really, really cool. It also has the famous shtick where Aykroyd and Belushi go to Brian's house as cops and get him out of bed and force him to go surfing in his bathrobe. It's been reused and shown many, many times. Lots of little interesting interviews. Practically any Beach Boy documentary that has been made since has made heavy usage of the footage in It's Okay. It's a very, very cool documentary. And it's available on DVD. under the title, The Beach Boys Good Vibration Concert. Now, I have no idea why they call this the Good Vibration Concert, because it's the It's Okay TV special. Now, maybe they thought if they called it something more generic, it would have a broader appeal. But people who think they're getting a concert are going to be disappointed in this. And anybody like me who's looking for the It's Okay special really has to dig to figure out that that's what this is. But it's a really cool special. I'm sure you've seen some of the footage. It's cool to see it the way it was originally put together. Really, really cool Beach Boy item from 1976. So that concludes 1976. Later in the year, Brian made some appearances on the Mike Douglas Show, where he performed Back Home and Sloop John B. He also appeared on Saturday Night Live solo, where he did Love Is a Woman, he did Back Home, and he did Good Vibrations. It was not a great performance. I remember being very disappointed in it. I've seen it since. I like it a little better on a repeat viewing than I did initially. And they kind of rolled right in to the Beach Boy Love You album, which would be released in the next spring. They did have some sort of momentum going for a change. Oh, and I nearly forgot, there's one more order of business for this look at 15 Big Ones. I am going to fly my souvenir 15 Big Ones Frisbee for the first time in many, many years. Now, this thing's been whipped across parking lots, but then I decided it was a collectible and stopped throwing it. We're going to see if it still can do its thing after all this time. So here we go. Let's hope it doesn't suffer from plastic fatigue or burst into flames or anything like that. Let's hope it's kept its ginger after all these years. My mom always said not to play Frisbee in the house, but it's my house, so I'm going to do it. Here we go. Yes! It still flies. Beach Boy quality. Thank you. Please like, subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you next time. Bye.